Hey, Laura J.E. Hamilton here at Family's House, because that is what matters, connection. It is time to stop separating ourselves, making it us versus them, and creating separation, isolation, disconnection. We are social creatures by design. It is our natural state to be in harmony when we're actually in ourselves. But how many of us are somewhere else, in the not now moment of the past or the future, but either one not being where we really want to be because nothing seems to be good enough for us? We have become a very entitled society. And yet, with entitlement comes responsibility. With power comes choice. And with choice comes responsibility. We have to factor in our ability to respond. We have to be responsible for our own emotions. The 22 different levels of the emotional high rise that we physically can see ourselves to be as a metaphor, symbols. It is time to start paying attention to the signs, symbols, and symbolism happening in the world all around us. It is happening in the birds that we see flying and their patterns. It is happening in who we run into and what they have to say, not because of what they say, but because of how they make us feel and where we place that emotion within this high rise. Emotion, energy in motion. When our energies are in motion, we are going to be on a trajectory. And Abraham Hicks, as channeled by Esther Hicks, says that there are 22 different levels on this emotional guidance scale. And on this emotional guidance scale, we have the choice to either be at the depressed end of a downward spiral that starts at boredom and then gets into pessimism, overwhelm, frustration, disappointment, disillusionment. When we start cutting through those veils and then just get so buried. Around Christmas time, I came here because I was so emotionally broken. I was at the bottom. I was looking up from a depressed state, feeling like I had lost all emotional responsibility. I just didn't even care. And yet I cared more than I could even express, because I was so full of the lack of inner peace. I fully understood the inner part, the individual needs necessitating emotional resiliency and resonance, the ability to maneuver the emotional high rise of emotions, realizing we don't have to be in that bottom half. When we're only breathing from our middle down, that's when we have power. Because then we actually put movement to all of those depressed emotions that feel so heavy. Breath is what brings us home to ourselves. We must get ourselves connected to the earth, the mother, Gaia, that is there to support us from the very first time we touch ground. When we jump from the nest as the baby eagle bird that the mother pushed out because we're not meant to stay home. We are not meant to stay home for a sustained period of time until we hear the call, the soul's whisper that says it's time to go. It's time to do something else, something more. I don't know what it is yet, but I hear the call and I'm ready to go, some of us say, naively, as I did last year when I decided that I was going to finish this book that I had been working on for a year and a half already, and it was time to be done. And all of this energy, you can hear it in my voice, the tension. I don't feel safe inside of my body when I'm all upset, right? When I'm upset, my breath is totally in my upper chest. Do it with your own self. Pay attention to where in your body you're breathing from, because if you're breathing from your belly and you're expanding your hand first and then your upper chest, you're filling from the bottom up. It just makes sense. What's the point in filling from the upper part down? You can't reach as far. There's no way. Sometimes you need to do a little bit of both. It's about not judging where we are. It's about realizing that we are all starting where we're starting. We're all starting at some version of home. Home is where we find belonging in the world. This place, my uncle and aunt's home, is where I know that I have belonging and I can come because they love me just because I am. They don't come with expectations or attachments. They don't tell me who I need to be when I'm with them. They don't censor what I have to say. They just absolutely love me. And it's just so remarkable to know that there are people in the world that do that. And there are so many of us that are somehow invested in this commodity-like experience of doing something for me in order to get something for you. Manipulation at its finest. It's like we're waiting for somebody to come out and get us. And that's when we veil the unrest of having heard the call and knowing that in order to accept it, we'll have to leave everything behind, and it's all just too familiar, and it's too comfortable, and it's really inconvenient, and therefore I'm going to pretend that I don't actually want to do that thing that I know that I do. I don't want to actually go for it because we have PS. Ending our sentences. Being Parapet Syndrome. Parapets are the low and high points on a drawbridge, castle, or building that is actually just a false wall that doesn't have any strength, but it looks really strong. It's like back in the old days when you'd be on a drawbridge running into the castle and you've got people fighting on both sides and you've got all kinds of arrows going off. You want to have some high points to be able to run between in order to get to the next one, right? It's just common sense. But common sense is rarely common practice. That is a side note and unrelated to the visual that I was painting, but it is important to note that we are taught what to think, not how to think. Our school system is flawed because we are so focused on one thing that we forget that we are the whole thing. We are the seeds within the apple core. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. When we come home to ourselves, our aura expands and we just become like the light that is all around us. We become like the ones that we thought needed to come save us because we find out how resourceful we really are. There is no such thing as an unresourceful person, only unresourceful states. We must stop judging the whole of us by the one thing that we are taught to focus on, that we are taught that success is this, and you've got to achieve it in order to feel it. But as I listen to Abraham Hicks while I'm getting myself ready for work in the morning, you have to feel it in order to create the momentum toward that which you desire. You can't wait for it to show up. You have to feel it in the process, because the only reason we ever want anything is because we think it's going to make us feel better. And we have the ability right now to maneuver the emotional high rise of awareness within ourselves. It's the inner kingdom that is within us. And the inner kingdom is that part of us that when we were little, we didn't even recognize that there was anything that wasn't perfect, because we understood that we were it. We were the sovereign rulers of all this beauty all around us. This whole kingdom is mine, is what we said to ourselves when we were little, running through our personality. And as we ran through our personality, we're so excited to show it all off and perform for whoever came to the door, that when the first knock came, we ran and delighted and said, "Welcome! I'm so glad to have you." And when they opened the door and walked through and just saw how proud we were of all the beauty, and it glistened, and there were parts that were gold and there were parts that were just painted fun because it made you happy and you were a child and you didn't hold back, and it didn't matter that it wasn't perfect, because it was imperfect, but as that person who had come loaded down with their own garbage from having been run over by garbage trucks all day, from people dumping their emotions and just saying, "Ah!" I'm really sorry to the neighbors. We have to be mindful of how we're showing up and how we're impacting others. We are influencing our environment, and our environment is influencing us, and so it matters that we come where we feel like we belong, because when we have belonging, then we can reach for respect. But there are far too many of us that are not reaching for respect and settling for belonging. Because if we don't respect ourselves, no one else will either, because we teach people how to treat us. We teach people what is okay, what is enough, and what is not. We are responsible for our inner emotions. Inner being individual needs necessitate emotional resiliency, being able to maneuver the high rise, and resonance, because what we send out comes back to us. Whatever we think, we are like a radio transmitter that is sending out emissions of thought that turn into feelings based on our interpretation of the energy in movement, energy in motion that is happening within us. And when we get to that point where we say, "Whoa, this feels wonderful," you feel the energy flowing, because for the first time you've dropped your breath. And when you drop your breath, you can send out so much more, because you have so much more, because you are like a well. This analogy basically says that we are constantly pouring out or receiving water, the fluid of life, into ourselves. And this self is either being filled up or withdrawn from. And if we do too much of one or the other, we're going to have one of two effects. Well, three. There is the option to not move, and yet even not moving requires movement, because nothing stays as it is. Everything is impermanent. Think of the mandalas. Prince EA just did a video that was spectacular about the impermanence as symbolized by, or represented rather, the mandalas that symbolize, represent. We must recognize the representation that symbolism gives, because the symbolism is only a reflection of our map of the world, realizing that every single person has a different one. Every single one of us feels a different sense of belonging, respect, and ability to self-actualize, which is penthouse living. Penthouse living is at the top of the high rise of emotional awareness, where inner peace resides. This is where we are in an empowered state, where we have experienced passion, enthusiasm, authenticity, clarity of being able to see that when we're at the 22nd floor in this high rise, which is the same address from top to the bottom, and yet the experience up here compared to the experience down here is completely different. Everything looks different. When we realize that it is our ability to respond to ourselves that brings us home. Because regardless of what is happening anywhere, we have the choice at any time to drop our breath onto a deeper level. That we are able to enter into ourselves and find the magic that is waiting there. This is the spiritual warrior's quest for inner peace, that we have the opportunity to collectively understand through applied insight. I have been going through this process for nearly 2 years after I thought that I could get it done in a month, and I didn't, because I had a story about not enough. I had a story that I needed more because I wasn't enough. And so I tried to find things to compensate for my lack of enoughness. To compensate for my lack of enoughness. I wanted things to fill the void for me. And if I couldn't have things, better yet, a person. I just wanted only one. I didn't want a whole bunch because that required too much energy. And I never really wanted to send all of my team players outside of myself because somehow I understood I really needed to have them as close to me as possible. I needed to be able to communicate with them and be able to convey the best option for us because we were playing with our time, energy, effort, attention, and money together. It is so cold out here. I'm done. Heaven's just come out. Synchronicity. Things will happen at the perfect time to be able to say yay or nay. Things happen at the exact moment that is perfect for you to be able to say, holy shit, I was so on track. I'm so in tune. I'm just hitting it. Whenever I see a master number, that's what I think. Whenever I see a couple numbers together repeating, I realize that that number is there to teach me. And I had a conversation with my mom just last week, and I said about how my brother's pharmacy has 3 repeating numbers and how that was so exciting because it's all spiritual transformation. And my mom didn't get it because it's not her frame of reference. She doesn't associate numbers with significance. And yet I say, how can you not? I think of it every single time, and I use my Google all the time to look up symbolism, whether it be numbers, and the fact that I said that at 44, and that it's 16 minutes in. So if you're still with me, congratulations, you're different. Not different because we don't all have the capacity, but most people don't have the desire. Most people don't have the desire to find the team players to say, hey, you know what, let's stop and actually pay attention to what's happening right now. We have Donald Trump as the President of the United States, who just had the longest government shutdown in history. His story. It is the story that we share, and that story is the biography that creates our biology. Because our energies in motion are stored within this subconscious vessel, this house for the soul. And the soul sits at the center of the soul throne. The soul throne being where all of our magnificence resides. Imagine what it would be like for things to be perfect, for it to not get cold, to not have the wind blow, to not have things operating against us. In the very moment that we feel inspired and want to get something off of our chest, we want to speak our truth, 5th chakra, throat, self-expression. Blue is the color associated with this 5th chakra. We must realize that we have an energy center that runs through us at the center of this apple core. Isn't it spectacular that it's almost as if there are angel wings extending from me as I do this? And that yes, I do wear a pair of pants underneath of my pants because when I lived in England, it was so cold in the house that I lived in because it was built in 1777. It was an old farmhouse that was meant to be a parsonage. And our landlords were the owners and had created an apartment where the donkey used to squish apples outside on this little ring inside of the barn. So the house had 6 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, 3 fireplaces. Like, it was a big place. And I lived there with my partner at the time, and his kids came occasionally, and we had 2 dogs who were both huge, profound teachers to me and to whom I am so grateful for their love, for their healing. They make me breathe deep and also shallow because the love that I feel for them just makes me contract and just want to hold them and just say, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your lessons. Those lessons are not meant to be shared with the world yet. Some things you just have to keep to yourself. And sometimes we have to say that, and sometimes our creative baby is the very thing that we need to keep to ourselves in the creative celebration of it. We don't have to make sure that nobody knows about it because all of us want to share something. Confession is a throat chakra experience. It's an expression of our truth being where we are centered. Where has the elevator taken you within your 22 different levels of emotion? Where are you looking at life from? Realizing that your 7th chakra is the crown, and this is your divine connection. The raven is flying above, so look up raven. Google symbolism. There are so many sites with so many insights, and when we are willing to look at what's showing up for us, realizing that our life is the best video game that there will ever be, and that we get to play full out, or we get to distract ourselves and we get to choose. It's fully our choice whether we're going to have some constraints in order to enjoy freedom, because you cannot have one without the other, instead of becoming irresponsible of spending what we don't have in order to throw us into obligation, both of which are the opposites of the functional aspects of those very same experiences. We must realize that there are functional and dysfunctional creative patterns, and that when we are able to flip from the outside in, when we are willing to stop comparing ourselves to others and be able to flip that into a self-awareness that helps us say, hey, I am home when I breathe. I bring birth and death together in the same moment, which is the now moment, which is the only moment that there ever is or was. We have a choice to honor our bodies. We have a choice as to whether we are going to say, I am going to argue for my opportunities instead of my limitations. And I am going Hey! My uncle's there. Amazing. That's enough. Thank you. That's enough is as good as a feast. I love you. Laura J. Namaste.